topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers that are activated by meaning and purpose. Many organizations are not aware of just how critical it is to invest in developing their leaders and managers, not just for their own effectiveness, but also to avoid burnout and keep them fulfilled, and also that they can also measure and monitor the purpose experience in their organization to keep it working as an operational imperative. It's amazing stuff. You'll learn more about how we can work together at alisecortez.com, my personal site, or gusto-now.com. Getting into today's program, we have with us today Dr. Alexander Hutchison. He's a fitness and wellness expert based in Dallas. He is an athlete and coach, and he earned his PhD in exercise physiology. Professionally, he serves as editor-in-chief of Current Protocols, a leading journal in the life sciences, and he's the author of 4 different books. They are Exercise Ain't Enough, HIT, Honey the Hazda, The Swim Prescription, and the one we're talking about today, In Defense of Doping. He also has out An Unfair Advantage in Sports, The Body Matters. Dr. Hutchison is passionate about making complex scientific concepts accessible and engaging for his students, athletes, and readers. We're talking today about some of his ideas from his book, In Defense of Doping, and will situate why athletes are motivated to take performance-enhancing drugs, how their use is handled in and penalized across various sports, then how they play out in academia and music, and finally, how they drive to perform and achieve high results underlies performance issues and ethical matters in business today. Very, very interesting threads here today. He joined today from Salt Lake City, where he's traveling for business. Dr. Hutchison A. Hardy, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm delighted that you come on and that I want to share the story of how we met. And this is the book that, of course, we'll be talking about, In Defense of Doping. So ladies and gents, both of us live here in the Dallas area, and we live close to this amazing park and body of water called White Rock Lake. And we were out running on a Tuesday, as I often do, and he was minding his own business at the water fountain, and I think I probably said something to him, and he, of course, engaged me in conversation. He said something about his work, being a publisher and an editor, and where he worked, and I said, oh my gosh, I have so many people, so many guests on my podcast, who published through you. And he said, I should come on your podcast as well. So that is how we met. And I have got to tell you, Alexander, I really, really was rocked by your book. It is a damn good book, and I'm convinced of your case. And so let's take it. We're going to usher in our listeners and viewers into, I think, a really, really meaty and really important topic that I think is not understood at all. Mm-hmm. So, but let's first do this, just because my listeners and viewers haven't met you yet or read your book the way that I have. If you could just describe a little bit your early career as a professor, as a coach, and I know you credit your sports for teaching you lessons about teamwork and merit and resilience and the acceptance of failure as a prerequisite for success, which I think is astounding and pretty profound. So if you could just kind of sketch a bit so people understand the path you've taken to get to where you are now.
Sure. So I was a collegiate swimmer at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. I got a significant scholarship to go up there. Not quite a full ride, but enough that I made it so I could leave Houston and go up to the Pacific Northwest in the early 90s. We won 2 national titles my last 2 years that I was there, and then I continued to swim for another 2 or 3 years thereafter. Eventually, I knew when I was in college that one of the things that I would like to be was a college swim coach. And I was told over and over again, if you want to do that, you're going to have to get a master's degree. So in '99, I went back to school to get my master's degree. And that's really where I started to see, Lance Armstrong in particular took over the Tour de France that particular year. And it wasn't until several years later when I was doing my PhD that I became convinced that he was doping. But, in that transition, I was a lot like most of the fans who were out there who at the time were in complete disbelief that he could ever do such a thing. And then was just like them when I wanted him banned forever. But then over time, when you get a chance to compete in some other sports, Olympic weightlifting, boxing in particular was one that I did for quite some time that I got beat up a lot. I mean, you just do in boxing. And just getting older in sports, as I started to approach my 40th birthday, which was 11 years ago, you start to get these nagging injuries. And one of the things that really helps are cortisone injections and some other drugs that you can take just to get you back on the field. So a lot of the judgments that I had about doping as being absolutely awful and cheating and a shortcut and all these things, as you start to educate yourself within your PhD program in exercise physiology, you get one sense of it in terms of science. But then on the other end of it, you get the sense of some amount of empathy in terms of what it means, particularly if that is your profession and not just a hobby that you're doing on the side. A lot of the folks who are in sports are not multimillionaires. They have mortgaged their entire lives to be in that particular sport. And if a nagging injury comes along, they're left with a choice of doing something that could be considered unethical or hanging it up for the day. And if it's a once every 4-year opportunity to go to the Olympics, I'm not sure how many people would actually honestly do that. I was a professor for a number of years at 3 different institutions and was very happy in that role. But my wife always made more money than I did. And so her job took us from San Antonio, where I was a department chair and associate professor, to Dallas. And I spent one last semester at UNT, but that commute was brutal. And I did not like the demotion down to assistant professor again. So I took a job in publishing, doing stuff that I've been doing for free for many years. And now I work for Wiley, and I have for the last 3.5 years. And as you said, I'm editor-in-chief of Current Protocols. So it's been a progressive, long journey up to this point. And most of my initial work was just delineating the science of sports for people to understand in a way that was, more palatable than if you were to read a science journal. But then, I wanted to do something not necessarily edgier for the sake of it, but because I had these thoughts. So that's why In Defense of Doping came out. And then my most recent book, An Unfair Advantage, which is about the science of trans women in sport. And it is not a book about bigotry or hatred or anything like that at all. But I invite everybody to read the books and let me know what you think.
Well, Alexander, like I said, you really, really gobsmacked me. I was one of those people that was sitting on the sidelines judging about the whole drugging thing, and you really did enroll me into your central thesis of your book. So let's talk about why you wrote the book and what it is you're trying to convey.
Sure. So it's important that people who are sports fans have a sense as to what these drugs are, what they do, why people take them, and what are the potential motivations behind cheating. It's only cheating because the people who run the sport say it is. If those rules change tomorrow, then it won't be cheating anymore. A number of these different drugs and practices have been around for many, many years, and they were not made illegal until relatively recently within the history of sports. Now, the one that I focused on the most in the book and just in general is road cycling. So the Tour de France just finished Sunday. I watch it religiously every single year. But that particular sport has a long, dark history of doping that dates all the way back to the very first Tour de France in 1903. Back then, people would take these horrible concoctions. They would take heroin, they would take opium, they would take mostly brandy and wine would be the lower end things, but they would take strychnine, something that we typically associate with being a poison because it's a remarkable stimulator of muscle contractions. So imagine that. You want to win so badly that you are willing to drink what is poison in order to actually have an opportunity to win. So that gives you a sense as to the mindset of people who are competing in these particular races. And when you think of their alternatives in, pre-World War I France, there weren't a lot. You could try this and make a fortune and establish yourself and your family for years to come, or you can go work in a foundry or a factory or a farm and basically have a subsistence existence. For some people, they're fine with that. For others, no, they want more, and they're willing to do just about whatever it takes to get to that next level, particularly if it's only about doing something to their own bodies, because that's their choice to do, obviously. So the reason for writing the book is hearing these same tropes time and time again. Taking steroids is a shortcut. That is a complete misconception. If anything, taking steroids is the long way to go, because it allows you to train harder and longer than you could if you didn't take them. So you're not just sitting on the couch with 2 beers and injecting yourself with testosterone and then becoming a star athlete. You have to obviously do the training that comes along with it, and you can do more training if you do these particular drugs. And that's the primary reason people take these things. So hearing that time and time again, you wanted to just say, well, wait a minute, let me just explain a few things to you. And then you add into that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a minute, when you really look at society, the vast majority of us, maybe not all, but the vast majority of us are taking some drug as a pharmaceutical or an illicit drug that's serving the purpose to enhance our performance in something in our lives. And when you think of it that way, then a lot of this comes down to a level of hypocrisy that people just can't reconcile unless they're being truly honest with themselves.
Mm-hmm. So beautifully explained. And that's another thing that I really liked about your book. One, it is, damn well written, of course, and it's also very entertaining. I am not a sports nut, Alexander. I don't watch sports. I don't follow sports. I'm lucky if I know what season goes with the right sport. Honestly, that's where I am. But I learned so much about sports and how you taught about the different sports and how drugs are used in them and also punished within them, which is really, really, really interesting. And I think what's also interesting too is I appreciate your empathy to understand these humans and why they're taking these drugs. And you help us understand, which we'll weave throughout this conversation, that part of the problem in all this whole thing is that the only person that's held accountable for the use of these drugs is the athlete, not the owner organizations that own the clubs or the sponsors or the whatever. The only one that gets punished is the athlete. So that accountability needs to be really examined. And I want to make sure that that is heard by you listeners and viewers. This is such an important part of your point.
That's correct. So when we look at that, I'll give you we can go to the Tour de France, but let me go over to baseball real quick. In 1994, there was a work stoppage that led to the cancellation of the World Series for that year. And when they finally came back several games into the 95 season, attendance was way down because the baseball had thoroughly upset the fan base, who was not interested in hearing about an argument between millionaires and billionaires. They just wanted to see the great American pastime. And attendance stayed down until 1998. And that was the summer that Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa had this home run race to try to beat Roger Maris's record of 61 home runs. Now, it's remarkably unusual to have 2 different athletes at the same time going for the same record. And in 1998, actually, there were 3 because Ken Griffey Jr. started off the season pretty hot, although he faded away about midway through. But you have these 2 athletes that are in the same division with 2 very old teams, the Cubs for Sammy Sosa and the St. Louis Cardinals for Mark McGwire, same division. And, they're going tit for tat back and forth, getting close to breaking this record. And then it comes down to basically a 3-game series in St. Louis between the Cubs and the Cardinals. You could not script this any better. And then finally, obviously, Mark McGwire broke the record. But then the race wasn't even over. It continued on to the end of the season because there were still 17 games left. And then they ended up at 70 and 66 home runs with McGwire and Sosa, respectively. And in addition to that, you had Roger Maris's family that was at that final game where the record was finally broken. They were all brought out onto the field to celebrate in kind with the rest of the people who were present. So it was this amazing crescendo of sports lore that happened in this one go, and that it really saved baseball. It truly did. And then 5 years later, we have congressional hearings, and then again in 2005. So in 2003 and 5, that basically just tore all of that and threw it under the bus and ruined it forever. Now, there's no possible way that the administration of baseball didn't know. Whether Bud Selig wants to admit it or not, that's a different story. There's no way that they should have not possibly known. It's not possible. If anything, you can look at the number of home runs that were being hit, and it was significantly higher than it had ever been before. So there's one thing. And then the simplest thing of all is just to look at the players themselves. Yeah. Now, Sammy Sosa started his career as a string bean, and then he exploded into this massive person. Mark McGwire was always a big boy, but not like he turned out to be later in his career when he was juiced. So all you had to do was just pass a simple eye test to see that and know for sure that something is not quite right here. And the claim from Major League Baseball was we had no idea because no one ever told us. Everybody and their dog knew about this, and these two were obviously not the only folks who were doing it. But the point being that under these circumstances, the fans were somewhat upset. For whatever reason, Congress decided that they had to protect the children from the potential of using steroids, which I get into in the book. And so they had these hearings, and then we had all these players who were basically banned for life and will never be in the Baseball Players Hall of Fame. And for what? I mean, what exactly? I mean, so you took these guys who you should have known, wink, nudge, nudge, were taking steroids. You looked the other way as they saved your bacon and the entirety of the sport of baseball. And then as soon as the minute came that you had to do something to save your own skin, I'm talking about baseball, they just tossed them out with the garbage. This has happened time and time again. The same thing happened with Lance Armstrong in the Tour de France. In 1998, the same year that Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were doing their thing, we had the Festina scandal in the Tour de France, which was effectively the Festina team was the #1 team in the world at the time. And one of their workers, one of their masseuses, was pulled over at the French-Belgian border, a typical traffic check. His vehicle was chock-a-block full of steroids and other illegal drugs that were purchased illegally and were going to be used, obviously, by the team. So the Festina team was pulled out. Several of the teams pulled out. The tour almost canceled that particular year. And so you're looking at this, and they called that, the race of misery or whatever. I think that was actually called. The next year is when Lance Armstrong shows up coming back from his testicular cancer, almost dies, and here he comes and he wins the Tour de France out of nowhere. So this was called the race of redemption. And he saved the Tour de France. It may have continued on, but it certainly would not be the event that it is today.
Yeah.
And again, go ahead.
I'm going to say we got to take a quick break here, but sure. I love your passion, and by the way, ladies and gents, it shows up in the book just like that. It's just the same voice in the book, so you're gonna love reading this. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We run on the air with Dr. Alexander Hutchison. He's a fitness and wellness expert based in Dallas, who is also an athlete and a coach. Professionally, he serves as editor-in-chief of Current Protocols, a leading journal in the life sciences. We've been talking about the motivations behind why professional athletes are motivated to take performance-enhancing drugs and some of the accountability and issues related to it. After the break, we're going to talk a little bit about how drug use shows up and is punished in different sports. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As I'm dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive, they're led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of the latest one that came out is called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. in order to help leaders understand today's discerning and diverse workforce. What do they want from you to give their best performance, engage their talents, and stay? And then I provide 22 best practices you can fold into your operations to provide that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, alisecortez.com. If you are just now tuning in, my guest is Alexandra Hutchison, PhD, author of 4 books: Exercise Ain't Enough, HIT, Honey the Hazda, The Swim Prescription, In Defense of Doping, and An Unfair Advantage in Sports, The Body Matters. So you were situating, before we went on break, of course, how baseball was saved by the 2 baseball players, Sosa and McGuire. And then, of course, how Armstrong is really credited to really saving and advancing and greatly popularizing cycling. Before we get into a little bit more about how drug use shows up in these different sports, one thing I want to bring home that you've been saying, but we haven't said it outright yet, and I think it's important to say. You say in the book, the take-home message is that sports are anything but inherently fair because they are created by and for humans who are innately wired to be unfair. The negative impact that money has on sports far outweighs any potential threat posed by performance-enhancing drugs, and in my opinion, is one of the biggest motivations to dope. So the money piece, ladies and gents, is really important to get your head around here. Did you want to say anything else about, we're going to talk about, of course, cycling first here. Did you want to say anything else about what you're situating about the tour before we go on and talk more about cycling?
Just that one point that, obviously Armstrong has been banned for life. It is, since the time that he came forward on Oprah to talk about his doping, which was 2010, or actually 2012, there's been a number of other cyclists who are contemporary to Lance Armstrong who have since come forward and explained that they too have doped. They have not been banned for life. So it was basically judged that it was so egregious what he did, and I do think the things that he did to cover up his misgivings or his misbehavior were awful. But I don't think that it was justifiable to actually kick him out of forever. So for the 7 years that he won the Tour de France, there's nothing. There's no one listed as the winner because they know that they can't elevate anyone up to that position who wasn't doping too. So again, it's that sense of unfairness with the way that the rules are adjudicated that I find most offensive.
So what's also fascinating to me is, one, you go through and explain all the different kinds of drugs that are used in sports to enhance performance, which is also just fascinating. But then also how they're used differently by the different sports. Like, for example, I learned, if I have this right, that in cycling, a lot of the drugs are used for recovery purposes. Because it's such an acutely endurance sport, right? And the other thing that I want to situate around that too, that as we talk about how drug use is different in each of these sports, is you do situate in the book how, part of the contribution to maybe people drugging or doping as much as they are in cycling is that the organizers are making the courses extremely difficult. And yes, that means that you get more viewers on TV watching it. The climbs are interesting. You talk about the increased climb scores that are going up that indicate what's going on. So say a little bit about how drugs show up. What's the motivation to use drugs in cycling and how people are punished for using them?
So initially, the reason to use drugs was not necessarily to ride faster. The original Tour de France, there were like 5 or 6 stages. And they would go for 24, 48 hours, and then they would stop at the next place. They were about 300 miles long each as they would go. So they're riding through the day, they're riding through the night on gravel tracks. Fans are throwing out tacks and nails to puncture their wheels so that they can help the athlete that they would prefer to win. I mean, it's a crazy thing to think about when you're thinking about this. So if you have athletes that are taking large quantities of caffeine just to stay awake, they're drinking brandy so that they can stave off the pain. When amphetamines became available in the late 30s and after the World War II, that would be the drug of choice. That's still stuck around for a very long time. In the 60s and 70s, then you would switch over to corticosteroids. So cortisone is another one that people would take to bring down the inflammation between stages and make you feel somewhat better. And then eventually testosterone would show up, but you wouldn't take that like you would consider like a track athlete would to bulk up. Having a lot of muscle mass on you is the death knell for a cyclist. So they would take really small dosage of this in the attempt to try to recover more quickly between stages. And then finally, the granddaddy of them all is erythropoietin. So this is a hormone that we make naturally that induces the production of red blood cells within our red bone marrow. You'll get this naturally if you go up in altitude. When females menstruate once a month, at the end of their period, they have a spike in EPO to get some of the red blood cells back that they lost during menstruation. If you have a big bleed or a crush injury, you will also make EPO in large quantities. So what they figured out is that you can just give yourself an injection and it would elevate your red blood cells to an enormously high level. And then you have these gigantic sprinters who should never be climbing up mountains fast, who are then climbing up mountains fast. So that was throughout the entirety of the 90s and then all the time that Lance Armstrong was riding as well. So again, what started off as a way to dull the pain, then very quickly evolved into a way to get an edge over your competitors. And that's really where it remains today. It's a means to an end because everybody wants to win.
Mm-hmm. And so the big one that is punished in cycling is what?
Oh, well, there's tons of them that are. Anything that you get, it doesn't matter what the drug is. So there's not varying degrees of severity in terms of the drugs. Any one of them will get you on the ban list for a specified amount of time. Most of the time now it's 4 years for a first offense because what they're trying to do is make you miss at least one Olympic cycle.
Yeah.
We just had the female marathon runner who popped positive 3 weeks ago after setting, I believe, a world record in the marathon, was taking a diuretic, and it's a very common one. And what that is, that's not a performance enhancing drug. What that is a masking agent. And so obviously a diuretic makes you pee a lot more and a lot more frequently. What you're trying to do when you take a diuretic and you have other drugs in your system is flush them out before you have to go and drug test.
Yeah.
So that's why folks would take a diuretic. Otherwise, there's no possible reason why a marathon runner would want to take a diuretic because she's so dehydrate herself. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So that drug is not enhancing her performance. It's hiding other drugs that will, and it's still going to get her a 4-year ban.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so one of the things I thought was so interesting, you've helped us understand about how cycling drugs are used. Now, in baseball, the name of the game is to add muscle mass, right? So you can hit harder and further and blast the ball out of the stadium. So talk a little bit about the kinds of drugs that baseball players tend to use and the ramifications of those.
So there's going to be two primary ones, and they're going to be anabolic steroids. So anabolism means that you're adding stuff to your body.
Okay.
And catabolism means you're breaking it down, and the combination of the two of those is your metabolism. So anabolic steroids allow you to accrete or add on muscle mass. And what that does is, with the swing of the bat, you're generating more power than you would if you had smaller muscles. The ball's going to travel farther. And so what you'll hear from people who are not so much in the know is they'll say, well, it doesn't help the person's reaction time. It's still baseball. They still have to hit the ball. No question. But the ball that would have been caught at the warning track before steroids now leaves the stadium entirely after steroids. So obviously there's that part. The other drug that they will take most frequently is human growth hormone. Now, just like it sounds, that is a drug that allows you to add additional mass, but we're not so much in the muscle end of things. Where you see that working is with the connective tissues. So what I'm talking about there are tendons, which attach muscle to bone, and ligaments, which attach two bones together at the joint. Okay, those tissues have very poor blood flow to them. So when they get injured, they don't heal up very quickly. Most of the time when one of those gets injured, it's going to be surgery. So what you see with steroids is that they make the muscles big fast. And when the muscles get that big that quickly, they put an enormous strain on the tendons and ligaments that just can't keep up. And so you see ruptured tendons all the time. So HGH does help those connective tissues actually increase in size and become bigger and stronger. So oftentimes athletes will take these in conjunctions to at least eliminate the severity of potential injuries down the line. And a lot of athletes will take it after they've been injured to try to heal up quicker.
It's fascinating. And of course, we've now illustrated why they're so motivated to do that. Now then, let's talk about tennis. Your example of the 2022 French Open when Nadal was in obvious discomfort, and you talked about how he was able. They numbed his foot for what, 2 weeks or whatever for him to be able to play.
Basically, the whole fortnight. Yep.
And why? And so you were put forth in the book. Why was he? Why didn't he get in trouble for that? Why was that permissible? It's not the same thing in tennis.
It's not. So each of the different sports that's a signatory of the World Anti-Doping Agency has some level of leeway in terms of what they will and will not punish and what they will and will not allow. There was no confirmation that Rafael Nadal took cortisone, but no one ever denied it either. So that was one of the problems I had. The other issue is that basically he got a lidocaine injection right into the nerve that is a pain sensor only. So it was not his muscle stimulating nerve. So he could still obviously move that foot all over the places he needed to. But imagine trying to run, if you've ever watched the French Open, it's played on clay. And so these athletes, they're usually baseline athletes. They run one side, they put their legs, their feet planted on the ground, and they slide. They run the other way, put their feet grounded and slide. So it puts an enormous strain on the feet and the ankles. And I can't imagine trying to run. Now, I'm not Rafael Nadal, but I can't imagine running, sprinting, stopping, sliding, and trying to hit a tennis ball with my foot completely numb so much so that I can't feel it at all, as though you're getting like a root canal and you can't speak correctly. And when we're talking about the three primary rules for why it is that we ban particular substances or practices, one of them is that it's potentially harmful to the athlete. Well, I can't think of anything more potentially harmful than having a completely numb foot for 2 straight weeks. But if that's what Nadal wanted to do, if that was a risk that he was willing to take, that's none of my business. And I don't think it's any of tennis's business either. So they allowed him to go forth with it. The point being, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If he's going to be able to allow to do that for 2 straight weeks in order to win his 24th major, and I believe it was his 14th French Open, then why can't cyclists take an injection of cortisone if they've had a major fall and they want to get back on the bike the next day? I know the answer already. I'm being rhetorical, but the point being that if this is going to be something that we're going to look at as being an apples to apples comparison, all the sports should be treated the same.
Yeah. Alexander, I love your passion. I've learned so much from you. Let's grab our last break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We went on air with Dr. Alexander Hutchinson. He's a fitness and wellness expert based in Dallas, who's also an athlete and coach himself. Professionally, he serves as editor-in-chief of Current Protocols, a leading journal in the life sciences. We've been talking about how drug use is motivated for use in the various sports and how they're allowed or penalized. After the break, we're going to get into how drugs and other means of enhancing performance show up in academia, music, and the business world. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As you know by now, this program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. If you want to learn more about how we can work together and learn about how the Gusto Now Academy for leaders and individuals on various journeys alike, make your way to gusto-now.com and go to the training tab. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Alexander Hutchinson, PhD, author of 4 books, Exercise Ain't Enough, HIT, Honey the Mazda, The Swim Prescription, In Defense of Doping, and also the latest one, An Unfair Advantage in Sports, The Body Matters. So in the last conversation, talking about how drug use is motivated in the various sports, I found it really fascinating to have you start sharing how you started to first notice it showing up in the classroom when you were teaching. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So this was my second to last year of teaching. So this would have been around 2019. Before we had a big exam, I would always have a review session for anybody to show up and ask questions that they still didn't understand about the topics that we were going over. And at this one particular session, and most often the people who showed up were all my A and B students. It was never my F and D students who ever showed up to these things.
Okay.
So you have your highly motivated kids who are there. And so one of my kids shows up, and before we get started, pops out a prescription bottle, gives it a quick shake, pops it open, and then takes a quick pill, and then starts motioning around to everybody else in the class. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? You can't just give out prescriptions. And then, it turns out that it was not Ritalin, but the other ADHD medicine.
Adderall.
I'm sorry, Adderall. There we go. And so I started asking around, who all takes Adderall in here? And there was about 15 of my students there, and all but 2 raised their hand. And so I asked him, why do you do that? And you guys obviously don't have ADHD if you're taking it from someone else. And I asked the student who actually had the bottle, do you have a prescription? No, I just brought it off my roommate. He doesn't take his anymore, but he still refills them. He sells them. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, and so it turned out that it helped them all focus, but beyond just helping them focus in the classroom, it would help them focus when they were playing sports. It would help them. It would give them more confidence when they were in interchanges with the opposite sex or even the same sex. Some of my gay and lesbian students had the same story as well. When they would go to a party, that would be their drug of choice because it made them more comfortable to speak to people. Mm-hmm. I never knew any of this, nothing, and no idea whatsoever. So I've got 6 classes that particular semester. I did a little impromptu survey. Don't identify yourself. Just tell me, have you ever taken Ritalin or Adderall?
Adderall. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Do you have a prescription? And those are the only 2 questions basically. And I was shocked to see that it was a huge number that came back in terms of the percentage. It was well over 50%. It was a huge number. All of them taking it without a prescription. That is a performance-enhancing drug.
Yeah.
When I went to speak to some of my other professors, my colleagues, they're like, well, I don't know what you're going to do about it. I was like, well, I'm not really looking to do anything about it. I'm just surprised that this is actually happening. That then extended to, having conversations with some of mine and my wife's friends about just that. And they would come up and say, well, I do the same thing. Particularly, this was an accountant who I was speaking of. When tax season rolls around, I need additional focus. I just take some Adderall. And my doctor prescribes it to me for a couple of weeks, and then I don't feel it anymore. And then the next time around, I do it again. And I said, and we were talking about this in relation to doping, and she kept insisting, yeah, but that's different because that's in sports. That's cheating. Like, well, how is this? I know it's not cheating per se, but it's still a performance enhancing drug. And with that particular person, there was no getting through that she was not going to see it that particular way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why I think this is such an important thing to talk about. It's like all these other horrible people in the world doing these terrible things, but not me. I'm not part of the problem, but actually you really are part of the problem. So let's do this. Let's talk about first musicians, and then we're going to move more into the business world and even the case about the individual at the birthday party. But I was astounded. I certainly go to the Dallas Symphony, and you talk about musicians. They compete for their positions just like football players do. And you then situated, concert violinist and the co-concert violinist, and situate, how much the discrepancy is in their pay. So thinking about how that would motivate someone to be able to want to take performance-enhancing drugs to compete for that position. Can you kind of situate the music piece here with performance-enhancing drugs?
So I was watching World News Tonight sometime, and this particular story came up about symphony musicians who take beta blockers. Now, a beta blocker is a drug that blocks the adrenergic receptors throughout our body, but particularly on our heart. So if you get into a fight or flight situation, which is where you're just nervous and you get sweaty and your heart starts to pound, that's performance anxiety is what they call that. Yeah. You don't want to take something like Xanax because then it makes you kind of loopy, you can't perform. But you take a beta blocker and it makes it so that your heart does not beat as fast, which is one thing. But just as importantly, it doesn't beat as hard. So it makes it so you can have nice, steady hands, whatever your instrument of choice is. So there is a national organization that is dedicated to symphonic musicians. And they regularly will send out surveys about different topics. In this case, they sent out a survey questionnaire specifically about taking beta blockers. And of the people who returned the survey, and it was a significant number, upwards of 75% had admitted that they took beta blockers, and around 45% of the total number who took it or took the survey stated that they thought that it had an impact on their performance. So that is a performance-enhancing drug. It is absolutely no different than what an athlete would do, with the exception being that when you and I go to see the symphony, we don't necessarily, I'd say most of us do not at all, have emotional investment in what's about to transpire on the stage like we do if we go to a sporting event.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much easier for me to buy way into a particular athlete as being a hero, and then to be let down and disappointed in finding out that that person was not all that I thought they were going to be, or her.
Yeah.
Not going to be the same situation as far as symphony musicians are concerned. But to your point, it is competitive. It is even more competitive to get one of these spots on a big symphony, because there's only a handful of them, than it is to get a spot in an NFL football team. The total number of people who are coming out of college who have a music performance degree is way bigger than the total number of potentially eligible draftees into the NFL. Mm-hmm. And so you have tight competition for a very, very small number of spots. And the average shelf life of a symphony musician is much longer than the average shelf life of an NFL player, which is 2 or 3 years max. So the turnover isn't as great. So when these things come up, obviously they want to compete for it. And they do get a big difference in terms of how much they get paid, for sure. But there's also just the prestige of being the first chair, in the first section. That's a big deal. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I think you made a strong case for, the motivation for taking performance-enhancing drugs in various places. Now let's finish this conversation and bring it into the world of business. If you could just quickly touch on the case with Margot. You were talking about, the stuff in tennis that was going on, and she started talking about how she takes something and she was up for this big promotion which came with a substantial bonus and a big raise, etc. So you are engaging with her in conversation and saying, but hey, it's the same thing. So share a little bit more about that case. What was she taking?
She was taking Adderall.
Adderall, okay.
Because she was the tax accountant who
she was the same one.
Wanted to clear a certain number of these big accounts.
Okay, she was the same one.
And get them right. Mm-hmm. And so I was asking all these questions myself because I never knew how accountants worked or how they were judged. But there's obviously you can get a big tax bill through for a particular corporation or individual, and also avoid getting audited. That's a big thing. Yeah. So there's a lot of pressure to perform, as there is in any business enterprise. And in this case, she was up for a promotion against 3 other people, and she laid out very clearly what it was that she was willing to do. She has a particular moral, ethical, and potential danger to her body threshold that she's willing to put up with in order to do her job at the highest level that she can potentially perform, and no more than that. But that's probably higher than what other people would do. And then it's also, it's not illegal because her doctor is actually giving her a prescription, but for the other people who are doing this without a prescription, it is illegal. So these things that we talk about with morals and ethics, they're always very pliable, and they're always relative to the individual themselves. Mm-hmm. So one thing that we have to think about that's the exact same between a CEO and a Lance Armstrong is that these people mentally are not like everybody else. Everybody else has a threshold in terms of how much they're willing to do as a workaholic or not, and most people are not willing to go there. Mm-hmm. But some folks have an absolute drive to get to the next level, to climb the next mountain, whether it is in business space or whether it is in competition. They want that challenge to be met, and they want to get over the top. And whatever it is that they have to do within reason, they have their own reasonable limits, they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And they're not particularly interested in listening to what the average American thinks about their choices in terms of what they will or will not do to get to the next level. That is the primary place that I see that there is a congruence between the things that you teach in terms of, business and the things that I'm talking about here in terms of sports, because if sports is business for sure.
Yeah, the game of life. Yeah. So let's do this. Let's just talk about a couple of some of the notable scandals that have happened in business that really are related to what we've been talking about here. It's a drive to perform. It's a drive to succeed. And the monetary part of it is huge. We could always, start with the Wells Fargo, fake account scandal that happened in, 2016. I'm surprised a lot of people don't know about that. But if you could say a little bit about what you know about that and how it's related to this topic of really doing something at all costs to be able to perform and succeed.
Obviously, so you have individuals in Wells Fargo who are giving bonuses to underlings who are opening up as many accounts as they possibly can. They're getting rewarded for how many accounts they're opening up.
Yeah.
When they run out of people, because obviously you turn to your best friend and then her friend and then her friend,
Right.
and you go to family, and you keep adding, your book, but then there's no one else to sign up. So then they started to sign up people who were already customers for products that they did not ask for and never signed up for themselves. So in doing so, they're getting these little charges to their account that they don't even know are there because they never opened these accounts themselves. And then the person who opened the account is getting a bonus off that. Now, from what I read about this, the upper management never explicitly told them to do so, but had to have known it was happening and just looked the other way. Because if their people are performing well, then they're also going to get looked upon with a beautiful light because these are my managees and they're performing at a very high level, which means I'm a great manager. And then that's going to obviously provide a bonus to that particular person. And it feeds up the chain all the way to the top. So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to situate, because I did a little bit of research on this. The outcome was there was over $3 billion in fines that Wells Fargo had to pay. They fired a lot of their employees. It destroyed the public trust, and the CEO resigned. So there are definitely some consequences to this.
There are.
Something else you wanted to say about that?
I was just going to say, you don't know if any of the individuals who had their money taken got it all back.
Right.
I'd say a good chunk of them did, but it's just not possible to actually know, especially if they got disgusted and just left, then they're never going to get that money back, obviously, because they're not going to be there to ask for it. But again, those same ideas are present in sports because sports is just a microcosm of life.
Yeah, exactly. As quickly as we can, I just want to situate a few more. There was the Volkswagen admissions scandal in 2015, which I was captivated by. So that's where they literally installed software on over 11 million cars worldwide to cheat the emission rates. And the vehicles actually appeared environmentally compliant, but they actually emitted up to 40 times more NOx, whatever that is, in real world conditions. And I remember that extremely well. So that's definitely that drive to succeed at all costs, and similar kind of thread right here. Any comment on that case?
Right. So, I mean, that one was even more pernicious because what they did was they implanted a software within the car that when you go to get your vehicle hooked up, they'll actually plug something into the computer and then they'll stick another thing in the tailpipe to measure the gases that are coming out. Well, the software package in the Volkswagen told the actual machine that's reading the gas pipe, you're not really reading that's coming out. You're reading this clean stuff instead. And so this went on for years and years and years until some really good technicians figured this can't possibly be right. This doesn't make any sense. And then you were able to figure it out. But that skirted the law of dozens of different countries in terms of their environmental policies. And it cost Volkswagen enormous amounts of money.
$30
and
billion
also, like you're
penalties,
$30 billion. And then how much of your brand loyalty has been lost because of this?
Yeah, huge. And then just very briefly, just because this has been in the news just recently, Theranos blood testing scandal of 2015, that's where the founder, Elizabeth Holmes, falsely claimed that the Theranos technology could perform hundreds of tests on a single drop of blood. Of course, it never worked. So she's gone through the criminal charges, the company dissolution, very high profile trial resulting in Holmes' conviction. So was also really interesting. Any comment on that case?
That is the one that I see because we got a very up close and personal look at Elizabeth. You got a sense as to what the pathology is of these particular individuals. Her idea was fascinating, and she really wished it would work.
Yeah,
but it never was going to. And instead of taking the time to actually sit there and test it and figure out that this isn't probably going to work, we have to go a different angle. Just full bore. I'm just going to put my blinders on. Eventually, this is going to work. We're going to fake it or make it. Even though everybody around her is telling us this is never going to possibly work. It can't possibly work. They just kept on going and defrauding their investors over and over and over again. And then when it came time to pay the piper, she made these, what I feel were quite ridiculous claims that was the other person within the corporation who was, she was in a romantic relationship with him and he was physically abusing her and making her do this stuff. But they had tons and tons of evidence that wasn't the case.
Yeah. I so wish we had more time, Alexander. This has been just a fascinating, riveting conversation. I'm so grateful. I literally ran into you at White Rock Lake. You said yes. You came on. Thank you for being on Working on Purpose. It's an amazing conversation with you.
I can't thank you enough for having me, and I hope there's another opportunity for us to talk in the future.
Oh, you can run, but you can't hide. And I'm pretty fast. Listeners and viewers, if you want to learn more about Dr. Alexander Hutchinson's book or his books or his work, you can find him first on LinkedIn, just as his name, Alexander Hutchison. So it's Alexander, and then Hutchison is spelled Hutchison. You can also find him on Amazon under the listed authors as well, along with all of his books. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Carlos Hoyas. He's a fellow Forbes Council coach with me who lives and works in Brazil, doing business in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. We talked about the role of self-leadership in building dynamic teams and creating a strong corporate culture. And we embraced throughout the conversation how leadership, first and foremost, is an inside job. Next week, we'll be on air with Davin Salvagno talking about his new book, Thieves of Purpose, Overcoming the 12 Mindsets Robbing You of Your Potential. See you then. And remember, work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing your potential and making the impact we crave. And it can give us the opportunity to do business in a way that betters the world. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune in to Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.